Hello, welcome to my story time. Today we're going to talk about Charlie and the Chocolate Factory by Roald Dahl. Indeed, this is a good story. I recommend that you read it. Introducing the main characters are Charlie Bucket, Augustus Gloop, Mr. Willy Wonka, Mike TV, Veruca Salt, Violet Beauregarde, and the Oompa Loompas. Contents. Today we're going to talk about Chapter 1. Here comes Charlie. These two very old people are the father and the mother of Mr. Bucket. Their names are Grandpa Joe and Grandpa Josephine. And these two very old people are the father and mother of Mrs. Bucket. Their names are Grandpa George and Grandpa Georgina. This is Mr. Bucket, and this is Miss Bucket. Mr. and Mrs. Bucket have a small boy whose name called Charlie Bucket. This is Charlie. How do you do? And how do you do? And how do you do again? Is pleased to meet you. Wow. The whole of this family, the 6 grown-ups, just count them, you will know, and the little Charlie Bucket lived together in a small wooden house at the edge of the great town. Which is this? The house wasn't really nearly large enough for so many people, and life was extremely uncomfortable for all of them. There were only 2 rooms in the place together, and there was only 1 bed. The bed was given to the 4 old grandparents because they were so old and tired. They were so tired, and they never got out of it. Grandpa Joe and Grandpa Josephine on this side, and Grandpa George and Grandma Georgina on this side. Mr. and Mrs. Bucket, a little Charlie Bucket, slept in the other room, upon the mattress on the floor. In the summertime, this wasn't too bad, but in the winter, it was freezing cold. Drafts blew across the floor all night long, and it was awful. There wasn't any question of them being able to buy a better house, or even a more bed to sleep in. They were far too poor for that. Mr. Bucket was the only person in the family with a job. He worked in the toothpaste factory, where he sat all day long at a bench and screwed the little caps on the top of the tubes of toothpaste after the tubes have been filled. But the toothpaste cap screwer is never paid so much money, and poor Mr. Bucket, however hard he worked and however fast he screwed on the caps, was never able to make enough to buy 1/2 of the things that so large family needed. There wasn't even enough money to buy proper food for them all. The only meals they could afford were bread and margarine for breakfast, boiled potatoes and cabbage for lunch, and cabbage soup for supper. Then dinner. Sundays were a bit better. They all looked forward to Sundays, because then, although they had exactly the same, everyone was allowed a second helping. And don't forget to like this channel and subscribe it, or not this eggplant will be sad. And share to your friends and family, and remember to hit the bell. Okay, let's continue. The Buckets, of course, didn't starve, but every one of them the 2 old grandfathers and the 2 old grandmothers, Charlie's father and Charlie's mother, and especially little Charlie himself, went about from morning till night with a horrible empty feeling in their tummies. Charlie felt it worst of all, and although his father and mother often went without their own share of lunch or supper so they could give it to him, it still wasn't nearly enough for a growing boy. He desperately wanted something more filling and satisfying than cabbage and cabbage soup. The one thing he longed for more than anything else was chocolate. Walking to school in the morning, Charlie could see great slabs of chocolate piled up high in the shop windows, and he would stop and stare and press his nose against the glass, his mouth watering like mad. Many times a day, he would see other children taking bars of creamy chocolate out of their pocket and munching them greedily. And that, of course, was poor torture. Only once a year, on his birthday, did Charlie Bucket ever get to taste a bit of chocolate? The Wall family saved up their money for that special occasion, and when the great day arrived, Charlie was always present with one small chocolate bar to eat all by himself. And each time he received it, on those marvelous birthday morning, he would place it carefully in a small wooden box that he owned and treasure it as although it was a bar of solid gold. And for the next few days, he would allow himself only to look at it, but never touch it. Then at last, when he could stand it no longer, he would peel back a tiny bit of the paper wrapping at one corner to expose a tiny bit of chocolate, and then he would take a tiny nibble, just enough to allow his lovely sweet taste to spread out slowly over his tongue. The next day, he would take another tiny nibble, and so on, and so on. And in this way, Charlie would make his 6-penny bar of birthday chocolate last him for more than a month. But I haven't yet told you about the awful thing that tortured little Charlie, the lover of chocolate more than anything else. This thing, for him, was far, far worse than seeing slabs of chocolate in the shop windows or watching other children munching bars of creamy chocolate right in front of him. It was the most terrible torturing thing you could imagine. And it was this. In the town itself, actually within sight of the house in which Charlie lived, there was an enormous chocolate factory. Just imagine that. And it wasn't simply an ordinary enormous chocolate factory either. It was the largest and the most famous in the world. It was Wonka's factory, owned by a man called Mr. Willy Wonka, the greatest inventor and maker of chocolates there has even been. And what a tremendous, marvelous place it was. It has huge iron gates leading into it, and high walls surrounding it, and smoke belching from its chimneys, and strange whistling sounds coming from deep inside it. And outside the walls, for half a mile around in every direction, the air was scented with the heavy, rich smell of melting chocolate. Twice a day, on his way to and from school, little Charlie Bucket had to walk right past the gates of the factory. And every time he went by, he would begin to rock very, very slowly, and he will hold his nose high into the air and take a long, deep sniff onto the gorgeous chocolatey smell all around him. Oh, how he loved that smell! And oh, how he wished he could go inside the factory and see what it was like. Okay, it's right about time. So today's story is about here. And I forgot to say, I am Brian. So today we already talked about chapter 1. So see you next week to talk about chapter 2. Bye!